Man, 2020, eh? What a year. Is anyone else relieved that it's finally over? Well, I want to look back at 2020 because, like I guess for everyone, it was a difficult and challenging and interesting, in the good sense and in the bad sense, year for myself and for the Ikario team. And I want to see what lessons did we learn? Because with the Ikario team, we put ourselves in a position of learning, which is kind of a nice way to say that we threw ourselves into the deep end and we decided to try and make something happen despite circumstances. So in this video, I want to talk about what is the main thing that we learned from a very challenging year. And I have my thoughts, and some of the Ikario team member pitched in with some of their thoughts as well. The theme here for us is challenge, because the entire Ikario project, basically as soon as the pandemic hit and the lockdown started and so on, 90% of what we planned to do with Ikario, with this project, and in this year was just off the table. So that was how it basically started, is we had already started assembling the team and we were just about ready to meet up and start making things happen when the world locked down. And so the first thing was just a wrecking ball through our plans and dreams and goals. And we decided to respond to this with stubbornness. We decided to try and make it happen anyway. And Abby's thoughts on this, I think, summarize it well. That was kind of the first hard lesson we had to learn.
The very first lesson that I learned from Shane was his take on an intangible in entrepreneurship, which is about just doing it. He used the analogy of martial arts. He said that if you take a beginner and tell him, go wrestle this person, and your objective is to somehow subdue your opponent, you quickly realize that some people, they just don't have any fight in them. They'll be there in the ring, hands up, I don't know what to do, my sensei never taught me, I have no idea what to do in a situation, and they have a laundry list of reasons for why they can't do it. And then there's a second kind of person. When you throw that person in the ring and tell them, go fight and figure it out, the objective of somehow subdue your opponent is good enough for this person to figure out a way. See, these are the people that rise to the challenge and fight back. Everyone experienced the same external circumstances and uncertainty this year. And most people blame the year for being bad, the governments for not responding fast enough, the Chinese, the bats, the Italians, the traveling, and so on and so forth. I know I'm massively oversimplifying here, but in one way of looking at it, these people didn't have any fight in them. And for the people that chose to fight back, things were just as tough. It was just as difficult. But instead of focusing on how difficult things are and how tough things are and how nobody taught us how to deal with a global pandemic, the people who chose to fight back asked themselves questions like, what can I do to make the best of it? If it wasn't for the simple desire to fight back, we wouldn't have built Ikario this year. And that's why the biggest lesson that I learned in 2020 is to rise to the challenge and fight back.
This was the reminder that I had for myself, that I had for my team, that we came back to again and again, is rise to the challenge, rise to the challenge. Look at this as a challenge and figure out, how can I grow stronger? How can I use this as an opportunity to learn, to grow stronger, and to somehow reach my goals anyway? Something that's related to this is this year, I think we all found out that things are riskier than we thought, that things can get a lot less cushy than we were maybe used to. And Ollie has some interesting thoughts on this.
Hey, this is Ollie from Ikario, and this right here is Ruby. The main thing I've learned is that no structure is stable, and there is nobody coming to save you. Nobody. So we seem to, in society, place a lot of trust and faith and value in institutions and governments to make the right decision and to influence our lives personally in a positive way. And often if they don't deliver, we judge them very, very harshly. But I actually think this is a mistake. The mistake all along was placing that value and that personal power in their lap in the first place. And what this year has shown is that the things that we deem grounded and solid and stable are in fact not. That's always been an illusion. Reclaim your power and place trust and faith in your own skills, build and cultivate your own abilities, your own power. Reclaim that power by developing your own ethics, your own values, your own principles. Develop things within yourself that do not depend upon any giant, great, grand scale institution for your well-being. For me, that has been the biggest lesson of 2020. And Ruby, what's been your biggest lesson? Her biggest lesson has been, the more treats, the better. Is that right? Yeah, it's right.
Now, in a practical sense, we had to figure out how to, even though we were now mostly remote instead of local, even though our plans fell through and so on, we had to figure out what to do instead and how do we do it excellently. Another important theme for the ikario team in 2020 was the idea of shipping. How do we get really good at shipping things, at completing things? Like, we have to deliver value despite the challenges.
The number one thing I learned in 2020 was that I need to have shipping in mind at the beginning when starting a project. One thing I would always do for like actually a decade was that I would start a project and then I would not consider scope control, or would just go out of hand, or something new would come in and would be more exciting. And by focusing on shipping and like actually finishing something, and I actually proved that to myself this year by doing 43 short films. I think this is like the number one lesson I learned during all of this time, is that keeping the scope control in mind at the beginning and knowing when to attend to a project and when to say no.
This, of course, is an ongoing challenge for everyone on the team, and basically for everyone. But I think what we learned under the difficult circumstances in 2020 will help us a lot in the coming years. But then there's another thing that I think is really, really important, and Ryan has some thoughts on this, and I'm glad that he brought this up.
One thing I learned from this year: remember to have fun. Because this year what I learned is that, things can seem very tense at times. There's a lot of uncertainty with COVID and building this new business and this and that. And something that Shane always tells us, well, not always, but he said this before, is that to remember that you're playing. Remember that this is not life or death. You're playing. You're choosing to do this. We're choosing to build a business. We're choosing to do what we're doing with our lives. And it's supposed to be fun. So while all these things are changing and there's all this uncertainty, something I learned this year is that one thing I can always control is my state, my attitude, my mentality, and that is to have fun and enjoy the process. Cheers.
I'm really glad he brought this up, because this is something that I need to remind myself of as well. It's really easy to just be all doom and gloom and feel sorry for ourselves and kind of suffer and struggle and so on. And in fact, for some people, myself included, that's kind of easier to do, right? I've got a lot of practice like suffering and struggling and, being the brooding man, basically. And this was an important reminder that, I gave to the team, and that I'm glad that they're reflecting back to me, is remember that you're doing this voluntarily. And the thing is, even if things are actually deadly serious, if you stay playful and if you stay flexible, you can achieve more. Your chances of getting through a tough patch are actually better if you can keep that playfulness going. And speaking of keeping it going and keeping growing even in a difficult year, Dean summarizes it like this.
The biggest lesson for me in 2020 is that I could make positive, meaningful, impactful changes to my life with far less effort than I expected, in a time frame far, far shorter than I thought possible.
This I'm really happy to hear, and I think that's true for everyone on the team. It really has been a year of growth and learning for us, and we did manage to rise to the challenge. As imperfect and as messy as it was oftentimes, we did manage to get it done. And this is what ikario is about. We are all about personal growth, and of course personal growth can and has to happen even when external circumstances are not ideal. This is something that we aim to practice and not just preach. In fact, we aim to practice it far more than we preach it. It's much more about doing than about talking and philosophizing. And so for me, what is my biggest takeaway, my biggest lesson from this year? Well, For me, I think it has been a bit about daring and letting go of control. So I'm a control freak, and pretty much everything I've done up until now has been very, very controlled. Like, I really like to control my risk. I really like to be very aware of my risk and, have a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D. And this year, I learned to let go of that a little bit. Ikario is a hugely ambitious project. And right now, from what we've published, that isn't very clear yet. But in the course of 2021, that is going to become clear. It's going to become clear just how hugely ambitious this is. And what does that mean, that it's highly ambitious? Well, it means that we're unlikely to succeed. We're unlikely to fully reach our ambition, right? There are a million ways to fail at something like this, and it's very difficult. And this is something where I just cannot control all the risks, especially with how 2020 started. I had to learn to let go and surrender a little bit and go a bit more in the direction of like taking the leap. Taking the leap and doing something that I think is worth doing, even if I can't control it as much as I would like to. For me, the main lesson of 2020 was this, is that I can take such a leap. I can choose to do something where I say, look, I'm not entirely sure about this, but I want to attempt this because I'd rather attempt and fail at doing this than succeed at doing something else. And I can take that leap, and I will find support. I found lots and lots of support from the team members, from other people involved in the project, and from everyone who's found ikario so far. People have been very supportive, and that is something that I have trouble relying on. I have trouble relying on other people, and I have trouble putting myself in a situation where I can't be my control freak self. But this year, I started to move in that direction, and I started to learn that I can do this. I hope you found this useful, and I'd love to know about your main takeaways from a very difficult year. And with that said, I wish you all the best for 2021. May it be a relatively boring year for all of us.